So I'm going to be joined up on stage by a friend and an incredible colleague of ours, Jeff McMullen. For over 5 decades, journalist, author and filmmaker Dr. Jeff McMullen AM has given voice to the struggle by First Nations people in Australia and around the world. Through numerous essays and articles in the mass media and academic journals, Jeff has focused on the Australian government's neglect of the human rights for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the necessity of ending institutionalised racism and discrimination. Can you please join me now in welcoming to the stage Jeff McMullen. We have had quite a big discussion today on how to set the reset agenda and also the really important issues of why. I've seen you over there taking some notes and making some assessments of what it is that we've been discussing today, whether there's opportunities for innovation or creating an enabling environment for this reset agenda to occur. And certainly there seems to be a lot of commitment into the room for that sort of a process. So Jeff, I'm just wondering if you could reflect for us on some of the things that you've been able to hear coming out of today's discussion.
I write it down because I want to carry it around with me from what I glean from these days when we are honest and very direct and maybe feeling safe in the room. And for me, from the start of Raymond's Welcome to Country, it just reinforced all of the different facets of well-being that probably could be summed up in the phrase that health is a state of mind. Because on Gadigal country, that obliteration that occurred in the early phase of contact and dispossession, really today we would have to reflect and say, but the survival story that several people touched on early in the day is as powerful as the damage done, and maybe in the longer timelines of Aboriginal history, part of the incredible resilience that is the secret of your well-being over all of those millennia. So health as a state of mind then means today we've been looking at facets of that reality. What is that perception? You know, what are the parts of the matrix that we're living in that make us feel well or sick or in control of our lives, or waking up, as Kelvin described, and knowing that your day you will be oppressed and judged and misconstrued and carrying around that anxiety and all of the loadings for depression and chronic physical illness as well. The matrix is not only government and systems, but it rang through to me from so many speakers that Greg is right in saying it is clearly insanity to persist with an approach that so clearly has not achieved well-being when we have a world of evidence that says that is pointless and expensive. And in fact, additionally, speakers presented clear stories of individual people whose lives are made worse by the system, not only through neglect of patients who were left and mothers with babies who were left at the wrong hour of the day, and in fact, people we know whom died because of not being cared for with the same degree of concern, or were denied that access. So the system is not only deaf to the cry for help, the system is contributing to the damage. So as the day wore on, as an older Australian now, I have to look back through all of the phrases like resetting the relationship and really challenge myself to ask, have I ever seen the rest of Australia, the Australian nation, show the investment in the trust and the belief and the personal change from within that so many spoke about today? Or did we fall back on the stereotypes and the deficit discourse and the data that is damaging, as Maggie has just shown us? Evidence that says all of this, for more than 2 centuries now, has in fact not only contributed to past damage, but ongoing clear impacts on Aboriginal people. So my sense of reality, as distinct from insanity, is to say, so far, the failure is in the nation's refusal to invest in that trust economy, as people have called it today. Every time in my experience, there was a moment of expectation and of increasing the hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that there was going to be a shift of power and a relaxing of the great white protectors having control over your lives. I say it's been betrayed, and therefore we need to see that the language of phases of history that Stan discussed has an Orwellian trap. We can have hopeful phrases that describe seasons of great expectation, but if it's followed by betrayal, it does more damage than even the old historic policy of oppression that we're all so good at judging, looking back to the past. So Stan's challenge about are we going to be captive to that sense of identity that can lock us into never-ending war, I would join with the learned experience of saying, first, we have to be clear. We have to empty our heads and be very clear that indeed injustices and ongoing racism and a refusal by the system to change is a very important part. The system is the problem. As Rosalie Kenneth Monks famously said, in her language, she said, she is not the problem. The system is what we're looking at here. And who peoples the system? This is where the discussion of black and white, we've got to move to words that we think through carefully to get to what I suppose Stan was trying to urge us to see. How do we leave an identity sense that is divisive, and how do we actually come up with a sense of well-being? Is my good day or my sense of the good life really going to ring true if I know that it is damaging to a child within my gaze? How can what my children have be good or the good life if we know other children do not have the same health and well-being? It's fairly clear, if we're honest, if we have Kelvin's look in the mirror, it's fairly clear to see how we are all in this. We are a human family. And therefore, the divide of the us and them to me is a false dichotomy. We are a wonderful hybrid of peoples. And I reach back into the ancient timelines here, reinforce my confidence that well-being is bound up in those thousands of years of experience here of how you have opened your arms to others. You have had, we can call them protocols, but they were lived ways that took care of the stranger that came into the camp, of nations that live side by side, of difference, of diversity that is more extreme and amazing than in many nations across Europe. And therefore, instead of being afraid of that, I think the assets that we have to build well-being on really involve a process. If we stop thinking only of what is that final goal of having, a magic communique or a government policy, it is partly how do we humanise this? And in a daily sense, past looking in the mirror, but when we're in our workplace and everything that we do is focused on a family and a communal sense of well-being. These are Aboriginal values that I've taken aboard because I think being here You cannot understand what it is to be here until we learn that is now shared. That is your gift to my mob, and then we begin to have language to discuss being one mob, and therefore, in the honest appraisal of the system, we will overcome those differences that are the current obstacles. So a lot of discussion today, Kerry, was on clearly on the way Aboriginal people consciously know the racism barrier not only is historic, that the ongoing refusal by the system to truly see how damaging to health this is, despite all of the evidence, reminds us that we're having parallel conversations. There are two different agendas happening here. And despite Elizabeth Coff's pledge to listen very deeply and carefully, Elizabeth herself, in trying to initiate that, is recognising clearly that the system has not listened, has not been able to enact these things. And therefore, instead of having a parallel conversation, we've got to find the way in the room together where we start making those with their hands on the levers of change within the system to see we're actually talking about what families and communities face. And who makes up families and communities? People really like us all. That starts to take us past the us and them. We start to see that the deficit discourse that allocates and traps people in victimhood and isolates all of the investments from really the knowledge and experience within community. The tyranny of experts can be very destructive to hold us back from well-being. That's also evidence in the global learning about this. So there were so many facets that people contributed to today, and I thought it is not a beginning, it is a reminder that the road to well-being is as much about the process. It's not a statistical thing. It is a perception. If we feel we are in control of our destiny, we will take steps because that's what your brain will tell you to do. If you feel not only helpless, but sometimes hopeless, it is impossible to take those steps. So the perception of what we are doing together is mightily important. Clearly, there were speakers throughout the day that expressed their frustration that no matter what was said, really they weren't being heard because the action that followed was disempowering and often contributed to more damage.
That's a really important observation. Thank you so much for those reflections today. Part of the way in which I've been trying to do the reset in my own work and life has been to focus on the first 1,000 days, and it's come up quite a bit today. It is just a period of time. It is literally 1,000 days from the conception of a child through to their child's second birthday. And in that time, internationally, it's posed as a nutrition intervention. But what we've been able to do is use that as a way of resetting. When we include preconception into that phase, we're able to then start to help people think and imagine for themselves, is it time? Am I well enough resourced to become a parent right now? Am I empowered enough to make the decision to become a parent? From that point of conception through to age 2, we've been doing a lot of work in healing relationships between men and women in family groups and recognising the important role and contribution that both men and women have in this very important period of time. It has got health elements. We do policy work where we try to stop people giving us identities, and they do it so very casually. The violence of it is so casual, it's unbelievable. But there is no such thing as a vulnerable child, no such thing as a marginalised family, no such thing as a disengaged community. But there are children who experience vulnerability, families who experience marginalisation, and when you actually separate out an adjective from a noun, then what you're not doing is telling someone who they are from a position of authority. What you're doing is able to empathetically then engage with their experience. And with that, then you're also able to really facilitate self-determination, because we also do life coaching and mentoring rather than case management. And we say, here are some tools and resources for you. We're here walking along beside you, but it's not our business how you live your life, it's yours. And we encourage people to do that incredibly well. So this powerful opportunity to reset personal relationships, personal aspirations, make decisions, get information so that that pregnancy and the birth experience is the best that they can be, putting in place all the scientific evidence about building multiple generations of dynamic family expression. All of those things become possible, and you end up doing systems reform. You end up reforming people's perceptions of themselves and in relationships to others just by using periods of time. And I think that that's because it's a constant, it's outside of policy parameters, all of those things. And it gives people a chance to be in control of the reset agenda. So many of us have had the opportunity to do that. How many sisters and brothers at the end of relationships have hit the gym again, reset their relationships with themselves, started to flash up a bit, have a different level of confidence, go out there hunting, whatever. I've done that on at least 4 occasions myself. Everyone's having a bit of a laugh, but what you're doing is resetting your relationship. For some of us who've had the opportunities to walk away from toxic relationships, whether that's in our workplaces or in environments, that incredible sense of freedom, and all things become possible. And then what you make manifest for yourself is extraordinary. So some things happen when they reset under your own control. Other things are reset when the government, for example, in the Northern Territory emergency response, made a legislative decision overnight cut the human rights frameworks that give us the opportunities to do what we need to do. And then we were not in control of the reset of that particular agenda, and all manner of hell broke loose for a whole lot of people.
Isn't that a very clear warning, as Justine Mohammed said, that hitting a reset button that is mindless, meaningless, or minimalist in any of those areas that we've discussed will most likely be more damaging. And that's my warning coming from a 70-year-old man who's lived through governments that have had lots of clever phrases and societal movements that have sounded hopeful. But the promise and then the betrayal usually leads to further damage. And that cross-generational mistrust then becomes harder to really deal with when we just talk about resetting the relationship. Really, we've got to invest ourselves, our time, not because of a paternalism or a charity, the words that were used and then dismissed. All of that's going to frame the relationship. Frankly, even the reconciliation word, all of these R words can be meaningful or they can be fruitless, and ultimately, if they wear out, they are hollow. They contribute to the sense of betrayal and disillusionment. Therefore, we have to choose our words carefully, like you would with the person you're in love with. Be careful what you're going to say. And dare I say it, Rod Little said this to me very early in the day, that sometimes making someone else understand really how you feel, and especially in these areas of illness and of lack of well-being broadly, you've got to find the language because it's beyond their lived experience. No matter what they've done or how much they think they've wandered the world, sometimes you're really talking, it can be from the prime ministerial level down to the regional organisation or a middle management official that has the jobs list and the priorities that someone has told them are important, but in fact, when it comes to the understanding part, it really isn't there. So finding a way to humanise that, to me, means being careful about these neat little phrases that just say, like we would, well, I'm going off the grog or I'm going to the gym, When you get serious about your health at the survival end, when you are very serious about your children's health collectively, you're back to the well-being of your family, the well-being of your whole community, and you don't go lecturing them and judging them. You realise that all of our members of our families have varying needs, and it gives you the formula for investing the trust and the resources. So instead of judging one community or one family or individual, you actually look carefully at the needs. And I think that's the challenge for the system then, to be able to say, take it away from a black and white discussion and see it more in terms of, in our big mixed up mob, our family, who really requires what kind of support. At the preventative end, where do we need to get that message to make it clearer so that we bring the well-being? And as several people today touched on the phase of what is in place towards the end of life. Where is the kidney transplant? Where is the palliative care? I've just come back from a burial, having watched a man put it in a hole in the ground in the Northern Territory, and then the bulldozer moved in. And this was a man who performed King Lear on an English stage, and I was looking at the Shadow King go to this, who died of a heart attack prematurely, and thinking, where is the dignity at the end of this magnificent life of a brother that I love so much, and saw him bring so much well-being to so many other people. So we've missed out by keeping it locked in that us and them phase, and the system won't hear what you're saying until we humanise it. Stop seeing it as about separation and start realising, no, we haven't really got close enough to hear what your expertise, and we haven't found the way to make those others at the table understand. Some of that you should be assertive about. A lot of it you should be forceful about, because I don't say this out of cynicism, I say this out of observed experience, that you must be clear about what your collective well-being is. And you are absolutely right to say today, so many of you said it, my well-being and the rest of the country's well-being is dependent on us embracing the same concepts. The family, the community, the collective, the long-term well-being of country that nurtures us all. All of that I learned from you. We need it as a nation, but it should be your knowledge system is our formula collectively. We just have to put it into a clear language that isn't loaded with the baggage of the past.
That's true. And again, I just want to be able to reflect on something that Rod said outside, and then I'm going to open it up to other members on the floor, and I'm looking at a few people who are leading national and peak organisations in particular. But Rod, the National Congress of Australia's First People was really one which we made a huge investment in for a great many years, doing all the consultation processes on it to make sure that we could have a correct relationship with government, where we could realise our aspirations and where we could actually harness the collective love for our people and take it to a system that seems to hate us most of the time. And so we're talking love to hate, we're talking passion to silence, and we're talking truth to power. And sometimes we need appropriate vehicles to do that systems level change. Can I get a couple of microphones, please? One to Rod, another one perhaps over here to Romney Mocack, because Rom's, again, doing a whole lot of that innovation space with our health and wellbeing research, and we've generated a lot of information about research and the research initiative. But it's bloody hard to get it funded. And it's bloody hard to get it funded to the levels that we need it to get done. And on the issues that we've heard from Maggie, we need the Loacher Institute and others like it to help us create the opportunities to understand what it is that we want to interrogate, the reasons why, and then create researchers and competence around that research process to deliver on that. And Rod, the whole idea of just loving our families. and having systems in place like the National Congress and the inherent values and the principles on which you do that mediation. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit to us now about your reflections on the reset agenda, and for you too, Ron.
Thanks very much, Jeff and Kerry, for relaying my thoughts. It's a privilege to be here and amongst everyone today. But one of the things that I've said to the guys is that even in the first 1,000 days, what we have for our children and our families is love. We take that, for granted that is what we have to offer our families. That is what we should have to offer our communities and other families around us. To close the gap, response this year, I said to the Prime Minister, what doesn't go into policy development is love. And we know that when we get out there and we go to communities, we see families out there that may not have that love, but we know that love is there. And we should use that as one of our strengths, I believe. And I also encourage that we reset our own relationships with each other first before we start talking about resetting relationships with governments and other parties. The most thrilling experience of that, I think, is the creation of Congress and the privilege of bringing together those key guys from the Redfern Statement Alliance when we launched that during an election campaign a couple of years ago. We have drifted away a little bit, in my mind, on how that role is, and we've got to keep bringing back, checking in on our relationship, and not to use the word love in a bad way, but in a good way that we can do things together when we have love. And there's some good rewards from where love is there. And I just want to keep using that word because that strengthens the relationships. It is something that people understand, whether it doesn't matter what colour you are or wherever in the world you are. Love is so important. And it is so important for our children, which is our futures. So that's where I come from when I talk about this, and when people don't take love, not to build the word love into the policy or the legislation, but think about it as how it is contributing to an environment of love and a much loving sort of community and family. So that's where I think, I'm willing to go with people and I'm willing to work with people on that, to share. Thank you for the opportunity.
No worries. Thank you so much, Rod. We'll hear from Rom, and I'm wondering then if you can take that microphone just to the table behind you with those beautiful women sitting up there. That's one. What? That's it. Kate is there. That's it. That's the one. Give it over there.
Where?
Sorry, I'm really into gender equity, and so's the National Congress, just saying. So, Rom.
I'll extend on that, the call for more love, Rod. So I was, like a number of people here, around at the time when we lobbied before that 2007 election where Rudd came into power to get the Close the Gap campaign up. Jeff, you were a part of that, amongst others. And I remember we thought about thinking about not just targets, but metrics to measure performance against those targets. And we actually had a workshop specifically on that, and I presented, and I invoked a poem by our great poet laureate Kevin Gilbert, which was about, in this country we love world records, but we have a world record for infant mortality. What we should have a world record for is love. Now that just went down like a lead balloon amongst a bunch of statisticians and officials. But it does raise in my mind, what would this debate now be around a prosperity agenda if we had an agenda about measuring love, which is about trust and reciprocity and all of the stuff that we know is important to us. I mean, in terms of the Lowitja Institute, we've got, well, our vision, or our purpose, I should say, is quite simple, but it took a long time for us to get to it. And it's simply to value the health and well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That's all it is. And in that, it may be quite obvious that what's implied is that there's a devaluation. So that in all of that, we then need to construct what does value look like and how do we measure it? Who does the definitions, the design and the delivery of that? Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to be at the forefront of that without question. We can't have other people telling us what our success looks like. So this is fundamentally about entering into a negotiating space with us firmly standing where we need to stand rather than begging and pleading and worrying. That's the business that the Institute's in. We've got a number of research principles, 5 of them. The key ones for me are, the first principle is about benefit. So if we applied that principle to the public sector or the corporate sector or elsewhere, the benefit would not be for Aboriginal people. The drivers to think about beneficence is not about our mob. For politicians, it's about re-election. For public servants, it's about perhaps making the next promotional level. There's any number of things, but when we talk about centralising Indigenous people's futures in a public policy sense, who are the most invested? It's our mob. So this is where people like Kate Gilbert, I was an ex-bureaucrat, we've got, I caught up with Nathan earlier. I remember Nathan was a young fella in OATSI. We've all, contributed in the public service or in the community control sector or elsewhere, and all of that's valid. But I don't buy the reset, actually. This is a long way of me getting to the point that I don't buy the reset. I'm with Janine on this. We need a new operating system. The other things about the Lowitja Institute are about leadership. Maggie, you talked about if research projects don't have Aboriginal researchers, a reference group's not going to do it. Absolutely agree. In our projects, we have 87% of our chief investigators on the projects through the Lowitja Institute are black. The National Health and Medical Research Council, with their $800 million budget, about 50 million of that is allocated, as they say, to Aboriginal research. It's the flip side. We talked about mirrors earlier. It's the other side of the mirror. 12.5% of research projects that are called Aboriginal research projects in the NHMRC are led by Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander chief investigators. 87% for the Lowitja Institute, 12.5%. We're very grateful. You talked about the need, I think, for institutes like the Lowitja Institute. We're very grateful that Ken Wyatt has found some money for us to keep our doors open, but it's still only a third of what we need to keep our research agenda going just at the current level. So I don't want to sound like I'm just pushing the organisation's agenda here, but this fundamentally gets to the question of not just translation, but actually about us as Aboriginal people, whether in the research area, the policy area, services, Jono, Pato, services, where does data and evidence sit within that? Maggie, all of your work around data governance and sovereignty. All of this stuff is about Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people and organisations leading the way. And I'm talking a lot here, but what I'll seek to have out of this session is, because I've been to 4 of these 5 summits, I don't think I've seen anything necessarily come out of them which has driven policy reform in this country. So if we've got Ian Anderson up here this morning talking about the closing the gap, I should say, agenda, I'd want to see something come out of here. And the thing that resonates most deeply with me is actually thinking through structures and mechanisms whereby government give up power and Aboriginal people take control.
Very important. Thank you so much for that, Ron. My sister here in the middle table, we were talking about AHMRC or RMAC processes before, but you might have something else that you'd like to say, so just introduce yourself and where you're at now with everyone, please.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Jacqueline McGowan-Jones, Aranda woman, but in Victoria and new to the health arena. We were talking earlier, and Rod and Greg and Paddo, about, and exactly what Ron was just saying, that we have a unique opportunity right now when we're talking about resetting the agenda, that and that today can be much more than just a summit, but have a real action focus about what we do when we walk away today. And this is going to sound a bit jurisdictional-ish, long-time bureaucrat, but our, in Victoria, we passed treaty legislation last night, first off, but our Member of Parliament here sitting with me. But we have a unique opportunity today to inform the agenda going forward. I agree with Ron and Rod and others, and reset button for a different operating system. And there's a whole lot of things that could come together in that space, given that the COAG Health Council is having an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander focused meeting in August, and RMAC is working with NATSAHIS, the National Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Health Standing Committee, for the agenda, that this group here of exceptionally experienced, informed Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in the room could perhaps provide some guidance on where we thought those discussions could go to lead it from the perspective of our people, and have a real solid basis for moving forward.
Thank you so much for that. That's a wonderful comment as well. Just how we can actually take some of the ideas and the learnings from the collective in this room into different policy making processes seems to be very, very important just right now and timely. I mean, because if we can feed it in, then it's in place then for the next decade or so. What I'd like you to do, Rom, is give your microphone to Nikki, who is just sitting there at the same table with you. Who does a...
He goes the rest of your day now. No.
Sorry, my love. And then if you can give yours to Paddo there just behind you, please, because the Central Australian Institute and what you're doing there is just phenomenal. Unbelievable work.
And I'm going to talk about Paddo actually, so he can talk after me. Hi everyone. If anyone doesn't know me, Nikki Turner. My hat I got on today is chairperson of Indigenous Allied Health Australia, national peak body. So there's 4 national peak bodies. So Carl Briscoe is Natsiwa health workers, and then we've got Indigenous doctors, and you're seeing Janine today from Katsanam. That's 4. Yep, great. I'm good at counting. Anyway, and talking about reset, what we did at Indigenous Allied Health is our peak bodies never get enough money for what we want to do, especially around workforce. So with Indigenous Allied Health and AMSANT, we started a Northern Territory Academy, and we did have some nice funds guaranteed from a government department, and then when we went to start, the funds weren't there. That's saying it very nicely. I could put some other words in there, but I'll try and be good. So we just said we'll go ahead. So IHA and AMSANT went ahead, and it's been very successful. We've got about 20 young Aboriginal school kids. One day a week go to Charles Darwin University, and I was up there a couple of weeks ago, and they're doing a Certificate 3 in Allied Health Assistant, and we've just organised traineeships for them. So that's our reset. We're growing our own. 0.6% of the allied health workforce is Indigenous. So we're not going to wait around for government to put money to us. We are government funded, So I just put that out there. We're probably not anymore after I've said that, but we were. No, we've got 4 years funding, woohoo! And we've got a little bit extra, but we're not waiting around to try and do what we want to do with the small amount of funds we do. So that's our reset, and at a national level, the 4 peak bodies have come together and looked at workforce very, very seriously, and we're doing a lot of the stuff ourselves and with like AMSAN, and we've had other states now asking us can we do academies with them. So we're in talks now with them, and that will come from a lot of money just coming from Aboriginal organisations.
That's so wonderful when we can just do a forum by ourselves, I reckon. That's where we get the entrepreneurial action happening. That's where we get the innovation. That's where we can just do it for ourselves.
Isn't this, Kerry, like the examples Greg mentioned this morning of Yarrabah on the suicide prevention program? Having watched that happen, I would have to add to it that it's so convinced the white fellas working with Yarrabah that it begins to spread the positive approach of Yarrabah to some other community. And the same could be said for Richard Franklin's effort, on Gunditjmara country, focusing on what has summed up by lateral violence, but we know it's actually a nationwide, it's both political, it is in the health sphere, and really government can't solve that. With that same sense of self-determining authority, where even if you lose your government funding, you know what you've got to do that is right, surely to drive towards well-being, you have to do that. And maybe the evidence of your success then convinces government that investing the trust and the resources will multiply your good results. And it's not about copying models, it's really seeing individually around the country that that's really what the knowledge has come up from the community, you're driving it, controlling it, and that is, to me, self-determination. And then there's a chance to go to the political table with authority. Finally, you might find someone on the other side of the table that truly hears what you're saying.
And Minister White has been really good to us. He's, been really good to the 4 Peaks. He's helped us out a lot. And the other work we're doing is Tennant Creek and Palm Island, which needs a lot of help, huge amount of help.
Fantastic, actually. I've seen the Palm Island effort with the work that I'm now doing up in Townsville, and it's just extraordinary. Pato, we'll just come to you, and then we've got some questions, that we'd like to pose to the forum, just by way of closing off then. But Pato, if you could talk to us about what reset means for you.
Sure, thanks, Kerry and Jeff. Look, in the Northern Territory, we've been fairly active and vigorously advocating for change. Whenever I get into forums where there's all these other not-for-profits, non-Indigenous organisations that have a lot of money to deliver Aboriginal programs and services to our mob, I say to them, the days are up for you guys. Ever since the demise of ATSIC, they've had access to all that Aboriginal program and services funding from all levels of government. From our perspective, and I've been in the game 4 decades now, and I haven't seen much change at all. If anything, since the demise of ATSIC, which I did not support, I was part of ATSIC at the time, did not support the abolishment of it. We all supported major reform. I mean, it was like throwing the baby out with bathwater. And ever since, 14 years ago, I think was the day, Jackie? 14 years ago since ATSIC was abolished, I believe our mob have been disempowered. There's been no self-determination, and governments and every other person have had control of our destination, our lives. So we've changed that in the Territory, and I've been saying it quite openly and publicly that the Bingos and Ningos, I refer to them as, big international non-government organisations, and the Ningos, the national non-Indigenous organisations. Your turn now to get out of that driver's seat and in the passenger seat, because we've been there for the last couple of decades, and we're going to take over the driver's seat. So the Aboriginal leadership in the Northern Territory have been very, very strong, non-negotiable on that. So much so that we've, with the recent children in the detention Royal Commission, Mick Gooder and Margaret White did, it's now having, fairly robust negotiations. I had to growl a bureaucrat today. I'm also a spokesperson for the Aboriginal Peak Organisations, Northern Territory, and they're asking for an APONT position or, position on a particular question. And I responded, the bureaucrat came back and said, John, can you, confirm that that's APONT position? Well, I had to, the old blood pressure went up and I had to give her a bit of a rocket. So much so she'd just come back and apologise for the way she asked for the question, So that to me was not trusting, not respecting, had no appreciation of my status, the role I play, and standing in the community. And when we say something, take it as that's the decision from the Aboriginal leadership. Don't go questioning us. So I give her a bit of a rocket today and sorted that out. So we're setting up a tripartite forum, Commonwealth, Territory Government, Aboriginal Peak Organisations, Northern Territory and NTCOS, and we will drive that, the implementation of those recommendations from the Royal Commission through that forum. Very similar to the Northern Territory Aboriginal Health Forum, and other jurisdictions have got similar sort of structures around those health frameworks. So this is now in the child protection, youth justice space. So we're, like I say, this is a good example of resetting the agenda. Government, we told government, get out of the way. I mean, you guys have had, the responsibility of this, and the numbers in detention centres continue to rise, and more kids taken out of home care and all that sort of stuff. The Aboriginal leadership is going to drive this, own it, and take responsibility. And we got a group there of grandmothers and I think they're part of the National Grandmothers group. Yeah, they're deadly. They said in Alice Springs there the other night, big community consultation, that they're ready, willing and able to take responsibility, for those kids that need any sort of support, nurturing, love from our mob. And the grandmothers put their hand up, and so we're going to back them to the hilt. Central Australian, we're another hat, I'm chair for the Central Australian Central Australian Academic Health Science Centre. Just got allocated $6 million for research in Central Australia. Again, principles, values, project's got to be community driven, community owned. The translation of once that research is completed, we have Aboriginal people employed as researchers or research assistants so that they can translate that back to community once the research project is complete. So that looks promising. You might have seen some recent media around the contamination of water. We're hoping that all levels of government will respond to that like they did to a couple of other major issues, and allocated funding so we can get to the bottom of that and see how widespread that contamination is. It's unacceptable this day and age. Aboriginal communities and people, consuming contaminated water, so we need to find out how widespread that is and get remedial action ASAP. So that's what it's all about. And look, I'm a great believer, and I'm convinced, and nobody will tell me otherwise, that it is now time that Aboriginal people, communities, organisations take the lead in providing those services and programming. It has to be owned and shared, and the best vehicle is Aboriginal community-controlled organisations.
Thank you so much for that. Big round of applause to all of our elected speakers. Look, we're just about to finish up for this afternoon's plenary session, where we've had a bit of a conversation around some of the key examples from some of the peak organisations about how they've been able to reset the agendas. And certainly there are lots of family-based initiatives that are just going great guns. We've got a growing legion of entrepreneurs. We have got an incredible amount of effort going into the deadly runners with Rob Di Castella, who's taking people off and teaching them how to run 50 kilometres. I don't know why anyone would want to think that's fun, but anyway, That's good. And then I had this wonderful opportunity the other night in Melbourne to be part of a group of 2,500 people who went to see the Central Australian Women's Choir singing. And that was a beautiful moment there to have them all having a standing ovation. But there was also, I was crying my guts out when I was doing it, because again, I don't mind crying. But I just thought if one of those women individually turned up to a health service or walked into a shop, what would their experience be? Here they are exalted in churches around the world, but in their own communities, how are they treated, how are they admired, and how are they given respect? So I think that the key issues that have come through for me in this afternoon's session is absolutely that the system needs to heal by bringing all of us together in a unified way and having us imbue that new operating system with the trust and the respect that we know that we're capable of. And it happens in human-to-human experiences, and it is a beautiful thing when that happens. And Jeff, you have been an incredible and profound leader and contributor to our health and wellbeing just by being such a strong advocate and a champion for what is right and what is truth and what it means to be our fellow Australian.
I draw for my own well-being on what you've all shared, but to avoid the cynicism of thinking nothing will ever change, I go to the point Ron made about how many times have we conferenced or sat around a campfire and dreamed of that brighter day that's going to come. The point about that is that I think we have to personalise the leadership to change the system. We won't just tear it down like the barbed wire or the intervention science. We can't back a ute into the whole system. We've got to actually personalise it to the point. And I think within our own families, Darryl spoke about the influence of elders, of how marvellous even a laugh together can be. But, powerful leadership, if you look to any example we can see, for me, Lingiari, I can't think of a better example, in my lifetime, or Mandela, or you could go back to Monash, in wartime. Why were they able to take people with them? They were up against incredible kind of odds. And so it's not about the numbers game, the 3% versus the rest, I don't think. I think it's somehow making it personal, living it, demonstrating it, believing it, and then thinking, how did those people, especially that Aboriginal sense of humility and humanity, Lingiari said, then we'll be mates. It's such a convincing, open-armed way to say we'll all be healthier then. It will so clearly be the brighter day we're going to get to. So if we could carry that into however we try to reform, then you can take down anything. You can take down apartheid. You can take down a wall between brothers. You can really do anything we decide collectively we want to do. So I think we need to not feel we're worn out by our yarning. I think the careful listening, it is Elizabeth's pledge, and she did this to the Aboriginal health managers in the state when Elizabeth Coff was the first Secretary of Health in the history of this state to actually sit, as far as I know, around a table and to truly be open to hearing what it is that you want to say to a person with some levers of power and influence. That willingness to truly listen, not just to hear and dismiss and go back to the agenda, but to realise that's the point that really empowerment, trust, I think it starts to happen like that. And we have, in Aboriginal history and Torres Strait Islander history, the magnificent examples of the dignity that then rubs off on every one of us. I think we can carry that around, hopefully. I still think we're closer to that collective well-being here than any of the broken parts of the world that I've gone to. I think we still understand one another, even though we're not listening. There's enough of that kind of recognition of how serious this is, of how unfair it is. I think we all know that. The other part is about realising that actually Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people hold all of the knowledge. The rest of us need to recognise that and stand with you and do everything in our power. Make it a personal responsibility.
And so just to that, is there anyone in this room who is vehemently and violently opposed to having a statement come out of this summit which recognises the value of the Uluru Statement and to actually use that as something that we can agree to take back to our own organisations and institutions and come out with a statement of support in the Uluru Statement? Anyone vehemently and violently opposed? You have 3 seconds to reveal yourself. 2, 1, we're done. Who here would support our organisations, our workplaces to actually take on the Uluru Statement and to get in behind it as a unifying vision for who we can be and who we are when we're together? Okay. The other thing that came through very strongly is the issue of racism and discrimination, and we have a national health plan which says that health services need to be delivered in racist-free healthcare systems. And yet, in the reset and refresh agenda with the COAG closing the gap, it's still not up there and recognised. Do you think that this summit and people from this summit could take it to those new forums, those new places, and actually have discrimination and racism recognised as having a health consequence for us, and that we need to eradicate that from the systems of which we're a part? Yes? Yep, perfect. Thank you. All the big hands up. So I think that what we can clearly say is that there is a commitment going forward to getting some of the people to those technical workshops that are happening around the country, around the refresh agenda, to take some of the key lessons and ideas from this about how we might do that into those policy forums. We've had a commitment to the Uluru Statement. The first 1,000 Days Australia is drafting a statement where we're coming out in support of the Uluru Statement, and I suspect that many others around the country are as well. And if we can all then lobby for Ian to include in there the racism and discrimination in the next for closing the gap refresh agenda, that would be really fantastic to come out of this forum. Yes? It's not a resounding yes, but if we had some champagne in here, I'm sure we would be able to get a much more fulsome surprise. Can I at least get a little what? On that wonderful note, can we also then thank our exquisite elder from our other knowledge traditions?
Thank you. Thank you. Good day.